So, thank you everyone for attending this webinar series led by Semadem, the Brazilian Early Warning Center for Natural Hazards. Today we are very honored to receive Professors Ben Wisner and Ilan Kelman, who will discuss with us some aspects of this new ebook, Understanding and Addressing Disaster Risks. So I collect all the questions that the students send me, and I forward to Ben and Ilan. There are a lot of interesting questions, but today we will not have time to discuss all these questions. But Ben and Ilan choose some of these questions to discuss, and we would like to start with number 5 that was prepared by Julia.
Hello, I don't speak English very well, so I hope you understand. I have 2 questions. Is it appropriate to continue discussing the construction of disaster risk without considering the class struggle and the prevailing economic system, the capitalism?
What do you can say about this question, Ben and Ilan?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is lucha continua. The class struggle goes on, and I think it's really impossible to think about disaster risk reduction without thinking about the class struggle. That is, without thinking about power. But power in all sorts of different ways. And I think about power as political power, economic power, administrative power, cultural, social power, and coercive power. There are many different kinds of power, and they interact with each other. And quite a lot of the time, people are unaware of the ways in which these forms of power, these combinations of power, are influencing them and oppressing them. So it is a difficult struggle, and it has to be waged and conducted on lots of different levels and lots of different forums. What can I say? I mean, there really needs to be, people need to wake up. And how do we wake them up? How do we help them wake up? I think communication is an extremely important part of this. And of course, what the skills you're learning as graduate students in Victor's university will help you in that task of communication. I think for other people in other positions in society with other livelihoods and circles of contact with other people, they will have other opportunities. And I think it's a lot simpler in democracies, and I'm very happy that Brazil is still a democracy. There've been some difficult times in the past, but it's still difficult to deal with those forms of power. Maybe Ilan has something to say.
So the answer is very similar. And Julia, your question is exactly about disaster risk construction. My main caution is to be careful of words with many meanings and various definitions, one of which is capitalism. So it is easy to blame one word people have many different ideas, theories, and implementations of what capitalism means. I prefer to say exactly what I'm talking about. It's about wealth inequity, resource distribution, abilities to deal with those challenges, and the consequences. Yes, those come from some implementations of capitalism. They are worse in some implementations of non-capitalist societies. North Korea, the Soviet Union, many other countries which were under Soviet control, many countries in Africa and, of course, South America, which implemented different forms of socialism, communism, capitalism, and still ended up with almost parallel disaster risk construction. What is particularly interesting about an important interpretation of capitalism today is short-term profit. If we wanted to maximize our short-term profit and our long-term profit, we would stop disasters. We have the numbers that reducing disaster risk, avoiding disasters, saves money in the short term and in the long term. So if we were purely capitalist, neoliberalist, hard right, open market, free market, let's save as much money as possible, we would stop disasters. But we don't. So it's not just capitalism, it is not just the prevailing economic system.
Thank you, Ilan. Thank you, Ben. Do you want to add something then, or we can move to other questions?
Well, I agree completely with what Ilan said. Um, it is important to be careful with words, and he did an excellent job of showing the example. I think I think the emphasis I would put the emphasis on the temporal dimension, short-termism. There, I think I don't know if I could show this with numbers, but my sense is that large corporations, the boards, the directors of these large corporations have shorter and shorter time frames for return on their investment, and there's a short-termism that's taken over, and under these circumstances, then there can be disaster construction or disaster creation can take place more easily. I make a distinction, I think, in chapter, where do I make this distinction? I think in chapter 9, that's right, one chapter that, of course, we all wrote everything, you understand, in this book, but there were lead authors, and Victor himself was a lead author on chapter 9. And one of the things that we ended up distinguishing in chapter 9 was goal, purpose, and intention. And this goes again to this question of the precision of language and what we pull on board when we use words indiscriminately. What we were trying to get at was the mentality, the sort of mental universe of people in power, whether they're administrators or politicians or corporate leaders or the directors of non-governmental organizations, what was going on in their minds when they make decisions that end up increasing disaster risk. Some of it is you might say intentional, in the sense that they're caught up in short-termism and they want a quick result, and they allow investments in mega projects. So we wrote quite a bit in chapter 9. You'll remember about mega projects, large dams, for instance. They may believe that they have a greater goal in mind, right? Their intention is not to increase disaster risk. They don't want to do that. They don't set out to set out to lay the foundations for great floods, loss of livelihood, loss of land, contamination of land, even loss of life. That's not their intention. They have a higher goal in mind. They have a purpose behind what they're doing. Nonetheless, the result is the same. So we have to dig deeply into the situation, as well as the way of these decision makers, as well as the way that they're thinking about these matters. Okay, so that's what I would emphasize.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ilan. Now I think I will ask Monique to do your question.
Hi, good afternoon again. Like I said, my name is Monique, and I will start asking something more specific about the PR model. Yes, that is what distinguishes specifically the categories of dynamic pressures and fragile livelihoods and unsafe conditions. What are the differences between these two categories in the PR model?
Could you repeat that question? Thank you, but can you repeat that question, Victor?
The question distinguishes the categories of dynamic pressures and fragile livelihoods and unsafe conditions in the PAR model.
All right. So I think I need my hearing aids. Well, why don't you start off? Here?
Since Ben developed this, it's his right to pass it to me. Initially, when we look at Ben's original work, and even back before the first edition of At Risk in 1994, the categories were listed, and there was a reasonably clear delineation. My interpretation, which I hope Ben will contradict, is that as ideas evolved, and even well beyond the second edition of At Risk in 2004, much of it did become about definitions, but there was also the interaction and the impossibility of separating them. So I also then think about my own interpretation and where I might want to go with these ideas, which is not so much about at-risk definitions or Ben's amazing and inspiring work. And to me, I think, well, a social pressure by definition changes. Consequently, a social pressure by definition is dynamic. So we're really just talking about what society does to people to pressure them or move them into a certain direction. And one of those pressures is actually fragility as well as lack of safety. So if you feel that you're in fragile livelihoods and or unsafe conditions, that's generally not your fault, but you feel that social pressure or dynamic pressure to do something, which may be to move or to look for another job, which can then make you more vulnerable or less vulnerable depending on circumstances. To me, it also goes the other way, that exactly as you become more vulnerable or less vulnerable, those pressures on you are changing, they are dynamic. And so if you're becoming more vulnerable, then they are leading to more fragile livelihoods and unsafer conditions. So is there differentiation? I think the PAR model does that. And it is so useful and important for discussion, for interpretation, for understanding. If we then want to look at individual or collective motivations, it is very hard to separate them, or more to the point, very hard to separate their interaction, because they do feed off each other and there are positive feedbacks and negative feedbacks. But Ben inspired me. I might have got it completely wrong.
I think I got it completely wrong. I think we have to start by remembering something that that we authors have repeated many times in the course of both the original books that I did with Ian Davis and Terry Cannon, and the more recent work that I've done with Ilan and JC and Irazima and with Ilan. And that is the PAR, the PAR, pressure and release framework is a framework. It's a machine for generating questions, relevant questions. It's a goad. It sort of pushes people, pricks people, tries to wake people up and says and get them to ask relevant questions. I used a metaphor in one place in the book. You may have noticed the framework is like the little book that medical students used to carry with them. It was called, in fact, the Vade Mecum in Latin, follow me. And it would ask questions. Does the patient have a fever? Yes, no. If yes, then some other questions. If no, oh, then we'll ask some other questions. And this is just a framework for generating important questions, or even unimportant questions that you then set aside. It is not a model of how reality works. And many of the people who have commented over the years on PAR have made the mistake of interpreting it as an attempt to hold up a mirror to reality and say, this is how reality works. These are the elements of reality. These really are dynamic pressures. This is really what unsafe conditions and fragile livelihoods are like. It doesn't try to do that. What it tries to do is get us to ask questions, exactly the kind of questioning that Ilan just did when he was pulling the two apart and trying to put them back together again, talking about the way they interact, the way they change over time, the way that society would push this way, would push that way. That's exactly the sort of response that we want to get when people come to the framework. Not a model, but a framework. Another thing I have to say is that the model lacks sufficient flexibility and dynamism. And I say this, as a matter of auto critique, criticizing myself, criticizing the efforts we've made up to this point. That's why, by the way, my written responses to your 14 questions will really be a launching pad to propel me at the age of 82 to go back to this, to PAR, to the PAR, the pressure and release, and attempt to make yet more improvements. And I thank you again for those 14 questions. So in particular, I think Ilan is right that if there were more flexibility, more dynamism within PAR, we'd see people's response. So this is yet a third thing I have to say about PAR, and it's a sincere kind of breastfeeding mea culpa, mea culpa. We have really left the experience of living with risk, the experience of trying to recover from risk, the emotional and full human response to these experiences. We've left that out, okay? The subjectivity is not there. PAR is a structuralist framework that asks us to ask questions, but it doesn't get anywhere near the human experience. And do you understand what I'm saying? Let me, am I making sense to you? I see people sitting there. Hello, planet Earth. All right. Well, there is such a thing as an experience of living with risk. Okay. How many of you? Let me ask, how many of you have actually experienced a landslide, or someone you know, a family member, have lost their house in a landslide? Or maybe you've responded, as responders, you've responded to a landslide. Huh? How about a flood? Flood? Yes, flood. All right. Yeah. Okay.
How about a pandemic?
Pandemic. Right. Good, Ilan. Yeah. And fires? Anybody? Fires? Yeah. All right. We can describe those events, or those processes that led to the events, or the process that was punctuated by something that we call an event. But we do not come anywhere near the experience, the emotions that you felt, that your friends and loved ones felt, right? And that is one of the reasons why I end chapter 10 with something that you maybe found a bit strange. It's something about head and heart. And it's about the role of love and the role of anger in disaster studies. And you're in a seminar now, you're engaged in disaster studies. Now, and some of you also in practice, so disaster studies and practice, there is an element of compassion. Why do we do this? You might ask yourselves, why are you studying this? Why are you doing this? Why does Ilan, why does Victor, why does Ben do this? Why, over such a long period of time, have I done this in various places with various partners? And the question comes back to me. I have to ask myself this question, and I think the answer is that I care. It's about caring, it's about compassion, but also I do it because I'm angry. I'm angry because many local governments, many national governments, many corporations, many international institutions, including the non-governmental sector, they don't do enough, or they do the wrong things, or they ignore the knowledge that we already have. I mean, Ilan, you've been very articulate about this. In fact, you came up with a sort of the final paragraph of chapter 10, where we're talking about turning the framework around, and can there be a process where we create more safety, right, rather than create risk. And you have us saying something like, there is enough knowledge. We have enough knowledge already, right? Why don't we use it? Please, we're speaking now to the audience for at risk, including the governments and the NGOs and the other decision makers. Won't you join us in putting this knowledge to practice? Am I misquoting you? Misparaphrasing you?
Not me, all of us.
All of us.
You're not misquoting, you're perfectly interpreting, but all of us, not just me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, could you want to elaborate a little bit? I mean, we have enough knowledge. Do we really?
As a scientist, I always want more knowledge. For the basics, in terms of reducing disaster risk and saving lives, we have so much that we are not using.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would have to agree with that, especially when I consider how large our galaxy is and how little we know. Actually, I was really delighted, and I keep coming back again and again to one of the chapters that we've not chosen for detailed discussion today, but a chapter, I believe, is it chapter 6 or chapter 7 on hazards from outer space.
Chapter 8, Beyond the Earth.
Yeah, and in fact, Ilan was lead author on that. We all participated, and it was a tremendous education for me doing that and collaborating with my co-authors on that. I was reading at the same time a book by Alan Lightman, who is a professor of astrophysics and also a professor of English literature at Harvard University, and he is describing the universe really in a very poetic way, but at the same time keeping the science in mind. We know so little about our position, our planet Earth, and of course, the more we learn about the microscopic details, for instance, of the relationships between mycelium and various other kinds of mushrooms and how they that inhabit the soil and how they relate, how they exchange information, for instance, with trees, and how plants actually communicate by synthesizing compounds that they release into the air as pheromones that will actually send out a signal and call a particular wasp species to come and eat a caterpillar that happens to be attacking the plant. I mean, a fascinating world of plant communication we know almost nothing about. So the more that we look out into the rest of the galaxy and in detail at our relationships as living beings ourselves with other non-human living things and the broader ecology, the less we understand and the more we want knowledge. At the same time, I don't have to understand all the details of that relationship between the mycelium and the tree roots to understand that going into the forest and cutting it down simply because I want to send that lumber to one of Donald Trump's companies so he can expand a project of his is the wrong thing to do. So there is enough knowledge, basically, as Ilan says, to make considered decisions.
Victor, it looks like you're speaking, but I cannot hear what you're saying. Can you hear Victor, Ben?
No, I can only hear myself. There we go.
Yeah, great. So we'll move to question number 7.
Good afternoon. Are you hearing me? So in chapter 1, you see the two terms associated with misleading administration. What's the difference between you governance and misgovernance of disaster risk?
Ah, okay. Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in. So much is definitional. And sometimes we do use words loosely, or we use them as synonyms, which may or may not be appropriate. And I think these are some of the discussions which we need to continue. So I can offer 2 propositions or proposals, and then you can decide, see what you like better, or offer a third. One is that they are simply synonyms. There may be some differences, but in general, they overlap and operationally may mean the same. The other proposal is that misgovernance is bad governance without intention, and ill governance is bad governance with intention. What are your thoughts?
Very, very similar. I can remember actually writing that, and what I had in mind was a similar distinction, but the other way around. I mean, it doesn't matter because, as you say, it's definitional. But I was thinking that ill governance would be poor for a number of different possible reasons, but not because someone had ill intent in mind. Misgovernance actually, to me, implies that they say there is corruption, there is money being handed to the regulator, that something is wrong because of a corrupt situation. Now, again, corruption is just a word, and it can be defined in lots of different ways. And we actually, I believe in chapter 9, we actually differentiate between petty corruption and a couple of other kind of levels or kinds of corruption. So one can, go into detail, dive down a rabbit hole at any point in these discussions, and it does come back to definitions. But I think it is probably important to make the distinction, whether we call it between ill and misgovernance, however, as 2 poles, and we could. But I agree with Ilan's interpretation. I just happen to have given it another. I just sort of reversed the polarity in my own mind. but it's the same. It makes no difference.
Thank you, Ilan. And then there are a lot of questions related to how to consider the local knowledge in the discussion, right? I think we can move to question number 10. So Olga can ask you.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. So, when you demonstrate the importance of local knowledge collection, how can social scientists exploit different ways of thinking without treating traditional science as the sole arbiter of what constitutes valid knowledge?
You have started by asking the question, and so important by asking the question that way. What do? Listen. Respect. There should be no sole arbiter of knowledge. Together, we overcome the limitations of all knowledge forms and build on their strengths. There will be times when not one knowledge form dominates and should dominate. Other times when a different form of knowledge will dominate and should dominate. That includes different types of sciences, not just social sciences, but also physical sciences and humanities and arts. There are some absolutely amazing physical scientists, engineers, planners, and architects who also ask exactly that question in exactly that way. As long as we are always questioning ourselves in that way, recognizing the biases, the limitations, the advantages, and the excitement of all knowledges, then we will hopefully avoid causing the problems which you rightly imply in your question.
Yeah, I certainly,
Fala que caiu.
I certainly agree.
O Ben não voltou ainda. Só o professor Ilan tá online. Aqui não tá, ó. Ah, tá ao contrário. Você pode comunicar para eles que a gente teve um pico de luz aqui, ó. Agora voltou todo mundo.
Ben?
Could I add something to Ilan's excellent answer? Hello?
Yeah.
Are you there? Yeah.
Yeah, we are there. Sorry, we have, I think there's a thunderstorm coming. So we have a small problem here, but yeah, hope that we can continue the discussion. So I think we can move to Leda's question.
Sorry, let Ben respond to this question. I hope you are not in the floodplain.
Não,
Yeah, no,
você não apareceu aí.
sorry. Yeah.
What?
Ben, go ahead, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm looking to see if you have a lifeboat in the room, or some flotation devices. You know. Oh, well. Yeah. For some time, actually, I think from some of the things I wrote in the 1970s onwards, but also in the book that we share, I've used the concept of hybrid knowledge, so that I think if you, I mean, certainly what Ilan said is absolutely true in the best of all possible worlds. You know, open to all knowledges in all different disciplines. No perfect knowledge. But in fact, the way that many organizations, particularly some non-governmental organizations, approach local knowledge is to valorize it in such a way that it becomes, in fact, the guiding knowledge that helps them plan and actually execute projects, and they don't go well precisely because they have not taken a broad enough approach to knowledge, the kind of approach that Ilan sketched out. And I think there is always a role. When you come right down to it, if I had to ask myself when I go to sleep at night, you know, what really am I? I'm a realist. I'm a materialist. I believe in the material reality in this corner of the galaxy where we live, and the microscopic and the macroscopic realities to which we're all connected. These are real. And I think as a result, there's always a role for sciences that are based and inquire into these material realities. And people living their lives, their ordinary lives, spending as much time as they do working to put food on the table, to keep a roof over their head, to, interacting with their families in their small bubbles, their small little universes of sociality. They may get it wrong. Local knowledge is not always synchronized with the realities of the material world, particularly in this period of increasing climate turbulence and uncertainty and change, and as political, economic, and social situations shift and change. So there's always a role, and that's why I've talked and written a good deal about hybrid knowledge. Sure, you take local, you listen deeply, you listen seriously, you interact. You don't listen once, but you interact over a period of time and develop a relationship with the people that you're listening with. But at the same time, you keep in mind that there is this material reality that people have to live in, and the role of the natural and the physical sciences, geology, biology, etc., in understanding that. So that would be my only caveat, but I think it's one probably that Ilan would agree with.
Thank you, Ilan and Ben. I think we can move to question number 12. And Leda.
In your book, where can we find the most promising examples of recentrist construction today?
Go ahead.
Well, I would venture to say probably at various places in the United States of America where the Trump administration has defunded science, is really destroyed much of the capacity of the national laboratories. We're due for under the Trump administration or shortly thereafter. We're probably due for another huge pandemic, which will kill thousands, if not more, because those wild genes are out there, and it really takes the efforts of these national laboratories to identify them and to quickly come up with a decision about their virulence and the communicability of the diseases they might cause, and to come up with the vaccines. You may recall during COVID, there was a tremendous effort by national laboratories, the very ones that Trump has been defunding, to come up quickly with a vaccine. This was a partnership between the various national laboratories in the U.S. and corporations, big Pfizer and Moderna, particularly. But I think the promising, yes, it's much of what the Trump administration has done actually promises us some terrible future pandemics, as well as probably very expensive losses in floodplains and coastal areas where the regulatory functions have been reduced, and the flood mapping has been eliminated. Fortunately, there are state governments. There are 50 state governments within this country, and some of them, California, New York, for instance, Illinois, have administrations that will continue at the state level to regulate, et cetera, but they do not have all of the resources necessary. So that's an initial response. Ilan?
In terms of resistance to risk construction, I see all sectors contributing. Obviously, as scientists, we're at the forefront, we're leading, and we're explaining what can and should be done in different ways. We do work with governments at all levels, with international organizations such as the United Nations, with the private sector, from one-person companies to big multinational corporations, and the non-governmental, not-for-profit sector, again, small and large. The people that we work with are self-selecting. In general, the people are amazing. The individuals are dedicated, knowledgeable, and have just phenomenal ideas and actions about resisting risk construction. We are all constrained by our institutions. We are all constrained by the systems and the structures. This does not stop me being inspired. One example is a project we are continuing called Disasters Avoided. Disastersavoided.com, one word, disastersavoided.com, where we are looking for these examples which are promising and have been completed of risk construction. The open question, of resistance to risk construction by reducing risk. The open question is whether disaster risk creation is much more than disaster risk reduction. And in some ways, sadly, yes. In other ways, no. Especially when we look over the long term, particularly decades and centuries, and everyone has contributed. The converse is also, what do we do within our own scientific communities? What do we do within our own science networks? And too often, I see disaster scientists creating risk. You are well aware, we are all aware, that bullying, silencing, marginalization occur within our own scientific communities. We are all aware of the costs to ourselves of standing up against it. When we do this, it is the hypocritical approach of doing what we tell others not to do, of doing what we know creates disaster risk. And so it really is always a balance. How do we challenge those within our own networks who are causing problems, even if the vast majority of what they do is to reduce disaster risk? And at what stage do we choose to work with or not work with companies, the United Nations, governments, nonprofit, when we see them creating so much risk, but there are good people and they are doing some good work? This is a struggle we all face. We have different answers. No answer is correct. When we make a mistake, when we go too far in one direction, it is your job to call it out. It is your job to say, there is a very promising example of resistance to risk construction here. What you are doing is actually risk construction, so please change. And when I make a mistake, I admit it and I try to do better. I think we are aware others may choose not to. And yes, there is a danger in taking a stand against the government, against the university, against the UN, against the nonprofit, or against our colleague. The best we can do is what suits us and the sector, particularly over the long term, to ensure that we are always promoting inspiration, always promoting hope, always being realistic about these examples of reduced disaster risk, while being aware of the challenges we all face and the examples of increasing disaster risk.
Very good, very good. I'd only add that when we consider this balance Ilan mentioned between disaster risk creation and disaster risk reduction, over the longer run, which I would say maybe in the range of 50 to 100 years, maybe 200 years, if we can think in those terms, disaster risk creation is definitely quite likely to tip the balance in a dangerous way. And that has to do with the pressure that human activities are putting on the shared ecosystem, the biosphere on this planet. We have just this planet. We have just so much incident energy from the sun, the solar radiation, and it, converting it with chlorophyll to biomass, various kinds. And we are not living within this kind of energy balance. We're not living within that diet. Now we is one of these tricky words. Some people are, some people aren't. And this brings us back to what Ilan mentioned earlier, the vast difference in living standards, the vast difference in income, among human beings. I think this balance has got to be achieved. We've got to reduce the pressure on planetary ecosystems, on the biosphere. And we have to do this in such a way that people who are low income and already have fragile livelihoods, they don't suffer, but the ones that are high consumers at that other end, they reduce their consumption. I mean, it's a bit like we're really talking about progressive taxation, aren't we? You don't tax the very poor in a jurisdiction. You try ideally to in a progressive taxation regime to tax the very rich and then redistribute across societal functions. We've got to do something like that. So I suppose my take on this is that the human ecology and a reasonable balance with non-human life forms lies within the regime that I would call democratic socialism. And I don't know if any of you have heard of a candidate for president of the United States called Bernie Sanders. He's a senator from Vermont, and he has been, arguing for democratic. So he's the only democratic socialist in the U.S. Congress, in the Senate. So it is a legitimate and possible, although quite difficult, regime to imagine being implemented. But I think this is the way that a balance between risk creation and risk reduction can be achieved by reducing the overall footprint that we have as human beings on the planet.
Thank you very much, Ilan and Ben. And unfortunately, we have to finish our meeting today, but we hope in the near future we can schedule another meeting to discuss other chapters of our book. So thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, can I thank you all? Thank Ilan. I want to thank the participants and you, Victor, especially. I have the 14 questions and I've said that I'll comment on them over the next week or so as I can find time. Also, if anyone has other things they want to say or ask or be in communication, Victor can give you my email. It's a very simple email address. It's just like my name. It's just BWISNER, just like my name, no punctuation, at igc.org. So India, Gopher, Charlie.org. But also, if you didn't get that, Ilan, Victor can tell you. But thank you very much, everybody. I've really enjoyed this.
And same with me. Please contact me. Email, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Blue Sky, whatever works best for you. Obrigado.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Ilan, how are you doing?